So let me start by asking you then about the information that you gave to the Senate in 2021 and to MPs in our parliament here about Facebook knowingly promoting content that is divisive, harmful, and harmful to mental health. Let's talk about the content first of all, and then the knowledge that you say Facebook have of what that content promotes and them doing it.
In 2021, I came forward as a whistleblower with 22,000 pages of documents, largely detailing how Facebook selects the content that you see on things like Instagram or on Facebook every day. We take for granted the fact that there are billions of pieces of content that Facebook could show you, and yet they pick out just a couple to prioritize for you each day. Your attention is not being focused by your friends or your family, it's being focused by an AI, by a computer. What Facebook found as far back as 2019 was that when they changed their algorithm to optimize for business purposes, the content that was being distributed across Europe changed. When they sent interviewers to go talk to politicians on the left, on the right, in Spain, in Poland, across Europe, people said the same thing over and over again. We know you changed the algorithm because what we can say online now is different than before. Before, we could put out something that we get is not super exciting, something like an agricultural white paper. The food we eat is important, but agriculture is not the most thrilling thing. And yet now we have to put out content that is divisive, that maybe calls out some of our plays on the lower interests of our followers, that inflames anger or inflames fear, because that's what gets distributed. And the fact that they knew this, even though they saw that it was contributing to more and more hostile dialogue around the world, and chose not to act on it until it was too late, until we saw things like the charging at the Capitol in the United States, is a huge problem.
So talk us through briefly what they, or in your experience, what Facebook saw of what the algorithm was delivering, and then what they did or did not do about that.
Sure, I'll give you an example. The algorithmic change that we saw in 2019 shifted away from recommending content based on how much time you were likely to spend on the platform to seeing whether or not they could incite a reaction from you. Content that causes you to click reshare, content that causes you to click like is different than content that maybe has you sit and consume it for a while. And what they found was that content that was polarizing, content that was divisive, disproportionately got distributed compared to other kinds of content. Some of the kinds of things they could do to even keep that kind of strategy, but improve the tenor of our information environment, was they ran experiments where they said, when you speak to someone different than yourself and connect, when you're able to reach across the aisle, as we would say in the United States, and talk to someone with a very different set of beliefs, that's a hard skill. Those are our peacemakers. We should be rewarding people who can have hard conversations like that. And they developed algorithms of being able to identify those people. And they found that when you promoted content from people who could have successful conversations with people different than themselves, you got less hate speech and less violence.
And less interaction?
Violent content. You spent slightly less time on the platform. It might be a little less thrilling than, and we're talking about like fractions of a percentage point here.
This is the whistleblowing that you did about 5 years or so ago. What's changed?
Oh, great question. There was a period of time of a couple of years where Facebook really took its responsibilities differently. They doubled the size of their safety team. They spent a lot more time thinking thoughtfully around, do you want to, for example, weight reactions the same way for political content as you do for, say, content about cats? It's great to have an interaction about your family photos. Do you want to be incentivizing knee-jerk content for political content, for example? But when Elon Musk bought Twitter, everything fell apart. We forget that when Elon fired half the people in his company and another 25% quit, that he set a precedent that you didn't have to invest in safety, that you were going to get away with it. And when Facebook fired a huge fraction of all their safety and professionals, less than a year later, Mark said publicly, Elon showed you could rip the Band-Aid off and there wouldn't be consequences. So we're now living in a world that's I think, as dangerous or more dangerous than it was back when I came forward. And that's why we have to stand up and demand more.
Mark Zuckerberg said on the Joe Rogan podcast that Facebook had been responsible for taking down or sort of shadow banning legitimate criticism of COVID lockdowns or vaccine efficacy when related to COVID, that it wasn't a platform on which people could have genuine debates about real things, and that needed to change, and that's why he's changing the sort of the community note system that Facebook operates. Do you think that's fundamentally a good thing, a realization and changing direction in the right track, or not?
This is interesting. I'm often associated as being someone who, quote, promotes censorship. The core of my complaint was that content moderation, that's the systems that went and tried to find what was legitimate or non-legitimate speech, or what Facebook considered legitimate or not legitimate. The AIs are just not that smart. They can't figure out what we're actually talking about. They can't tell if that's hate speech or if it's talking about a real societal issue we need to have dialogue on. Facebook ran lots and lots of experiments on how they could change their product in different ways such that it would make the system safer. I'll give you an example. When January 6th happened, 0.3%, so that's a third of a percentage point of users, invited 30% of all the people who joined those groups. The top user invited 300,000 people to stop the steal groups. You don't have to censor individual ideas to make the platform safer. You have to go in there and say, maybe you shouldn't be allowed to invite more than like 50 people a day to Facebook groups. Those are the kinds of tweaks that actually make a difference at scale.
You say that you think things have got worse, actually, since you came forward with this evidence. I don't know whether you have children or young children.
We just had a baby.
Oh, congratulations.
You're the first people we've talked to it about.
Oh, well, many congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
I wonder then, as you think about your child growing up and getting older, whether you would be content with them aged 9, 10, 11, going on Facebook, having an Instagram account, with the way in which this stuff is monitored or not monitored.
So I think the problems that are the biggest problems on Instagram are different than the ones that are the biggest problems on Facebook. That the big problems on Instagram are largely around things like promotion of content that makes kids depressed, promotion of content that makes kids encourages eating disorders or encourages really dangerous stunts. It's interesting the ages that you called out there, 9 years old. In the United States, as far back as 2 years ago, 30% of 7 to 9-year-olds were on social media.
That's insane.
And yet, officially, these products are for 13 years or up. The oldest child of both Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram, and Mark Zuckerberg is 9 years old. Fun fact. I would not feel safe having a 9-year-old on these products. 9-year-olds can't do the very complicated, it's called like a metacognitive skill of being able to say, people don't post their whole lives on Instagram. You don't get to see their sad days. You don't get to see all the boring stuff. And what ends up happening is you create a generation of kids that feels very anxious and feels very less than when they could be spending that time, finding who they are, developing skills, finding their passions, interacting with other kids and learning skills that will help them be successful adults. So particularly on the issue of kids, we need to stand up and demand more because time's running out. That 9-year-old never gets to be 9 again. They will live with how they were shaped by Instagram for the rest of their lives.